Notice how your gray hair came in patchy instead of all at once, or how your knees ache like they belong to someone 10 years older, while your memory still feels sharp as ever. Some people wrinkle early, despite eating and sleeping almost identically to friends who haven't. Muscle loss seems to creep along quietly, then suddenly speeds up overnight. If aging were steady, none of this would make sense, so why does your body seem to age in pieces, instead of all together? Scientists have found a clue hiding inside your cells, tiny cells that stop working but refuse to leave, quietly aging the tissue around them. The real mystery isn't how old you are, it's how many different ages your body is secretly running at once. Your ID shows one age, but that number is a lie of averages. Somewhere inside you, a joint might be aging like it's 70, while your heart is aging like it's 30. Somewhere else, your brain might be quietly slipping, while your skin still looks fine. If your body ran on one master clock, this couldn't happen. So something else is setting the pace, tissue by tissue, in private. And that something is about to change how you think about getting older. Here's what's actually happening inside your tissue. Aging doesn't spread evenly through your body like dye through water. It starts small, in single cells that get damaged and then do something strange. Instead of dying and clearing out or repairing themselves and moving on, they just stop. They stop dividing, stop functioning the way they used to, but they don't leave. They linger, like guests who overstayed a party years ago and are still sitting on your couch. Scientists call them senescent cells, but you can think of them as zombie cells, not alive in the useful sense, not dead in the clean sense, just stuck. And crucially, they stay local. An old knee injury from your 20s doesn't send damaged cells wandering through your bloodstream to confuse your elbow. They stay put, right there in the joint that got hurt. That's the first clue to the mystery. If the damage stayed local, the aging stays local too. But lingering quietly wouldn't be much of a problem on its own. The real trouble is what these cells do while they overstay. They leak. Specifically, they leak inflammatory signals into the tissue immediately around them, like a slow chemical drip seeping into the neighborhood. Nearby cells pick up on these signals and start behaving differently. They slow down, they get sluggish, some stop performing their normal jobs altogether. This is where the patchy gray hair mystery gets its answer. Hair color comes from pigment cells living in each follicle. When senescent cells cluster in one area of the scalp and start leaking their inflammatory signal, the pigment cells nearby are the ones that get affected first. Follicles just a few inches away, outside that leak zone, keep producing pigment like nothing happened. That's why gray doesn't arrive as an even wash. It arrives as patches, because the leak itself is patchy. Now here's where it gets more personal. How fast these zombie cells build up isn't fixed. It depends heavily on three local factors: how much a tissue gets used, how much stress it absorbs, and how much repair capacity it has access to. This is not the same in every tissue, and it's definitely not the same between two different people, even if their daily routines look identical on paper. This explains something that quietly bothers a lot of people: why one friend gets wrinkles years before another, despite eating similar meals, sleeping similar hours, living what looks like the same lifestyle. Skin repair rates simply aren't standardized. One person's skin might clear out damaged cells efficiently for years longer than another's, not because of more discipline, but because of a repair capacity that was never visible or comparable in the first place. The buildup was never a fair race with a shared starting line. It's worth pausing on why this system exists at all, because it sounds like a design flaw, but it started as a safety feature. When a cell gets damaged, especially damage to its genetic material, dividing normally becomes risky. A damaged cell that keeps dividing can turn into something far more dangerous, like uncontrolled growth, so the body developed a break. Damaged cells stop dividing. That's protective, and early in life it works exactly as intended, quietly retiring compromised cells before they can cause bigger problems. The flaw isn't the break itself. The flaw is what happens decades later, when the immune system's ability to actually clear out these stopped cells starts to slow down too. The cells that were supposed to be a temporary safety measure become permanent residents. The protection doesn't turn off, it just never gets cleaned up. This buildup also isn't always a straight line, and that matters for understanding why some declines feel sudden. Senescent cells and their inflammatory leak can accumulate quietly in a tissue for years without producing any dramatic change you'd notice. Then, once the buildup crosses a certain threshold, function can drop off in a way that feels abrupt. This is likely part of what's behind sudden feeling muscle loss, the kind where someone swears they were fine, then within what feels like a short stretch of time, strength and muscle mass drop noticeably. It wasn't sudden. The buildup was gradual and invisible, right up until the tissue crossed a tipping point where enough cells were compromised that overall function visibly changed. Oh boy, and this local buildup doesn't only affect things you can see in a mirror. It can affect function long before it becomes visible anywhere else. Neural tissue is subject to the same local buildup and inflammatory leak as skin or muscle. This is part of why brain fog or slower recall can show up years before any outward physical sign of aging appears. There's no gray hair yet, no visible wrinkle, nothing to point to, but internally, local inflammation from lingering cells can already be affecting how efficiently certain neural processes run. The absence of a visible sign doesn't mean nothing is happening. It just means that particular tissue's clock is running ahead of the ones you can see in the mirror, which brings the mechanism to its sharpest, strangest proof. Because these local clocks respond to accumulated stress and repair access, rather than to birthdays, chronological age becomes a surprisingly weak predictor for any one tissue. A 60-year-old who has spent years managing stress well, moving regularly, and giving their cardiovascular tissue consistent repair opportunities can have a heart that tests biologically younger than the heart of a chronically stressed 35-year-old whose cardiovascular tissue has been absorbing strain with little recovery. Same calendar distance from birth, completely different local timelines. The heart doesn't check anyone's ID, it only tracks what's actually happened to it. So if these zombie cells build up based on use, stress, and repair, there's one factor sitting right there in your daily life that you actually have some say over: repair. Tissue that gets regular activity, regular blood flow, regular signals to rebuild, tends to keep senescent buildup more in check than tissue that gets left completely undisturbed for long stretches. And this is where prolonged stillness becomes interesting. Not dramatic, just interesting. Research links extended stillness in a tissue to faster local buildup of these lingering cells. Your body seems to interpret hours of total stillness as a signal that this area isn't being used much, and less use tends to mean less repair investment sent its way. Which means there's a small, specific opening here. Not a fix, not a reversal, just an opening. Think about the one area of your body that sits the most still for the longest stretch of your day. For a lot of people, that's the legs, locked at a 90-degree angle in a chair for hours. For others, it's the shoulders, hunched forward over a keyboard, barely shifting position from morning to afternoon. Pick one, just one, not your whole body, not a new fitness routine, just the single area that's been quietly sitting untouched the longest. Then give it 2 minutes of movement every hour today. That's the entire reset. Stand and shift your weight, roll your ankles, walk to get water, roll your shoulders back, and let your arms hang loose for a moment. Nothing intense. The point isn't effort, it's interruption. You're breaking up the stillness that tissue has been sitting in, giving it a small signal that it's still in use, still worth repairing. And here's the part worth sitting with for a second, because it changes how you might feel about all of this. That achy knee, that patch of gray, that joint that feels older than the rest of you, none of it means your body is malfunctioning or falling apart randomly. What's actually happening is a very old, very reasonable safety system doing its original job. Cells got damaged, so they stopped dividing rather than risk turning into something worse. That part of the story was never the problem. The problem is just that these cells never got the memo to leave once their job was done. They're not attacking you. They're old guards still standing post at a gate nobody needs guarded anymore, leaking a bit of static into the tissue around them because no one relieved them of duty. That's a very different story than the one where your body is just breaking down for no reason. Here's something to actually try over the next week. No measuring required. Just notice. Notice which body area feels the most tired, stiff, or forgotten by the end of the day. Is it your legs after a day of sitting? Your shoulders after hours hunched toward a screen? Your lower back after a long stretch in one position? You're not tracking a number or chasing a result. You're just building a little more awareness of where your own stillness tends to collect, because that awareness is the whole first step toward giving that area its 2 minutes back. So come back to where this all started. Patchy gray hair, an ache in one knee while your memory stays sharp, wrinkles that show up years apart in two people living nearly identical lives. None of that was random, and none of it meant something was wrong with you specifically. Your knees, your brain, your heart, they're each quietly running their own clock, shaped by their own history of damage, stress, and repair. Your birthday candles only count one age, but your knees, brain, and heart are quietly celebrating different ones. The 2-minute movement reset you just heard won't reset the calendar. It won't erase a patch of gray or undo an old injury. What it does is far smaller and far more honest. It just helps those separate clocks tick a little closer together, one overlooked, understill area at a time.